Bienvenidos al capítulo 3, El tiempo libre, parte 1. In this chapter you will learn how to discuss daily activities and leisure, talk about food, express where you're going, and make plans. So the first section of this chapter, and of all chapters in this textbook, is a primera vista. It's essentially just vocabulary, or vocabulario. En la página 90 tenemos las diversiones. En la página 92 tenemos los planes. Y en la página 94 a 95 tenemos la comida, or las comidas y las bebidas. Okay? So if you have a look at that, it's very, very important to study these things, these vocabulary points in the chapter, okay? So I won't go over anything specifically, but remember, in the chapter you can study the vocabulary. You also have access to an audio function that coincides with the textbook and the companion website, okay, and the Mosaicos companion website. Please use that to your advantage when studying, okay? The second section of the text is going to be Funciones y Formas, okay? And what we focus on in Funciones y Formas is grammar, or la gramática. So, on the first section of this, we're talking about daily activities using present tense verbs. And so we see here, we look at en la página 99, tenemos el verbo hacer, poner, salir, traer, oír. So hacer means to do or to make. Poner is to put. Salir is to leave or to go. Traer is to bring. And oír is to listen, okay, or to hear. Okay? And in your textbook, it focuses more on to hear, okay? So these are all go verbs, okay? They end in go in the first person or the yo form of the verb, okay? So we see here yo hago, yo pongo, etc. And we'll see that here in the next slide. So again, continuing the idea of talking about daily activities, what we see on page 90 is we see these verbs that are extremely useful verbs, and we see their full conjugations. The only thing that is irregular about these verbs is actually going to be the yo form. And I like to call these go verbs because obviously we see that they all end in go. Hago, pongo, salgo, traigo, oigo. However, the rest of the verb is just going to function like a regular verb. So the verb hacer, and we have down here an explanation. So the other conjugations of this verb are more or less quote-unquote regular. Hacer, for example, functions like an ER verb in the as the present tense should. Okay? So we see yo hago, tú haces, él or ella hace, nosotros hacemos, or ellos. Okay? Mi hermano y mi hermana, ellos hacen. Okay? So definitely study these verbs right here. It's very important. If you have any questions about the conjugation, okay, feel free to contact me. We can practice this together on Skype. All right? Part 2, we're going to be expressing movement in plans. Okay? And so we're talking about the present tense of the verb ir. So on 102, we see that, on page 102, we see that the verb ir is the equivalent of English to go. So ir is an irregular verb. This means that you cannot simply take on an o or imos to the end to conjugate it. The entire verb changes drastically when conjugated. For example, we have the infinitive, which is just the standard version that means to something, right? So we have ir, our infinitive. However, when we conjugate it, we have yo voy. Él va. Nosotros vamos, etc. And a lot of people ask me with these type of things with irregular verbs, Profe, how do I remember this? How do I study it? Well, the idea with this is you just, on irregular verbs, you have to use it in context, you have to practice it, you have to memorize, okay? And that's what we all have to do as adult learners of a foreign language. It takes hard work, all right? So just bear that in mind. Don't become too frustrated. All right? So again, practice this, okay? On page 102, we can see this. Okay, we see the full conjugation of this, and we have a lot of exercises that I've assigned with the textbook homework and also with the online activities homework. All right, to further explain part 2, expressing movement in plans, we're looking at the present tense of IR plus A plus infinitive. So we call this ir más a más infinitivo. So again, the infinitive of a verb is like, for example, comer, bailar, traer. It's not yet conjugated, okay? And it's the equivalent of to eat, to dance, etc. Okay? So using ir plus a plus infinitive of a verb describes a future action or condition. So some examples, all right? I'm going to swim in an hour. Yo voy a nadar en una hora. She is going to eat tacos. Ella va a comer tacos. They, masculine, are going to be sad. Ellos van a estar tristes. Okay? So we have here, these two are going to be examples of future actions, and this is an example of a future condition. Okay. Gracias. Esta es la final de la parte, el final digo, de la parte 1. Okay? Okay, so this is the end of part 1. All right? So we'll end here with part 1, digest it, study these points a little bit on your own, send me any questions that you have, or meet with me through Skype, and we'll continue here in just a bit with part 2. Okay? Part 2 of chapter 3.